Well, folks, you know you're in for a treat when you hear that tune because it's time for another week of the RecPoker podcast. Thanks for joining us tonight, live on YouTube every Monday at 7:30 Eastern. My name's Jim Reid. I'm Bluffsterini in the home games and at RecPoker Jim on Twitter. I've got the best freaking job in the world because I get to hang out here every Monday night and chat with my poker friends about this game that we love so much. So I have to start by thanking our sponsors here at the RecPoker podcast, the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. And of course, I have to thank our premium members because we depend on their support. For only $15 a month, you can be a part of what we're doing over here. Most of what we do is free. We're a largely volunteer-based organization, but our premium membership is a great way to say thanks and to get more involved in the learning material, the social events, the great deals that we have, the great prizes, and all the fun that we have around here week in and week out. We've got multiple events pretty much every day. So come check us out at rec.poker. And I mentioned a lot of the what we do here happens as a community. It happens in a group. We are a big team here, and it takes more than just me. You get used to hearing my voice on Mondays, but I am just part of the RECing Crew. And if you want to find out more about me or the rest of the RECing Crew, you can go to rec.poker/crew. But just listen up because you're going to meet a few of them tonight in alphabetical order by first name.
I'm John Somsky, and I'm known as Poker Geek MN everywhere.
And I'm Rob Washam, and I'm Rabman50 just about everywhere.
And I'm Troy Chapman, and I'm Chapo Australia in the home game.
And like I say, we are a crew here. We make decisions together. We teach together. We learn together. We play together. It's a lot of fun. And it's all, most of what we do here, like I say, you can get a free experience just by signing up for a free community account over at rec.poker. Another fun thing that we do here is on Monday nights on the podcast, we give away a free prize at the end of the show to one of our lucky watchers, one of our lucky chat members, if you're here live in the chat. And so we're going to have a little draw at the end of the show, a raffle to raise some awareness for food banks and food insecurity and how you can help combat food insecurity in your own neighborhood. So we're missing a couple key members tonight in our live situation here. Our usual producing co-host, Chris Jones, couldn't make it tonight. And so the one and only John Somsky is in here pulling the switches and sliding the little levers up and down and fading in and fading out, making sure everything looks smooth. So thank you, John, for that. And unfortunately, we're also missing our guest, Tom Bauer, who had something come up at the last minute and had to shift the timing of our interview. So it was too late to change the broadcast itself. So we're going to record the intro. We'll record our usual community happenings at the end. And then I'm going to talk to Tom a little later this week, and we'll edit that into the show in the audio version. I see Joe Koulis has just joined the group as well. Joe, why don't you tap in and just tell the folks at home where they can find you and introduce yourself as part of the RECing Crew.
Yes, my name is Joe Koulis. You can find me at Twitter at JoeCoolPhD, cool with a K, or in the home game at Elvita11.
Thanks, Joe. So we are going to jump into the interview with Tom here shortly, but I just want to tease a couple things for the end of the show before I do. For one, if you're in the YouTube chat, like I say, stick around because we're still going to do our prize at the end. Number two, I just heard from Veronica Brill that she has confirmed her attendance as the guest commentator in Marek Madness, the finals. So if you're listening to this live, it's Monday, March 20th. On Wednesday, the 22nd, can that be right? Yes. On Thursday, the 23rd, we're going to be having the final four, the semifinal matches of Marek Madness, and I'll be joined in the booth by Rob Gardner, which is going to be a lot of fun. And then the victors of those two are going to go head-to-head in our best 2 out of 3 finale matchup on Thursday, March 30th, where Veronica Brill will be joining me, and we'll be having a lot of fun dissecting the play of two of the best when it comes to rec poker. So that's going to be super fun. We started with 16 folks, and we got all the way down to 2 for the finals. We'll see how some of that plays out this week with Rob Gardner. The other thing I want to mention is that I've been doing a little math, and I won't do it live on the podcast because you know that can get dangerous, but we are coming up on episode 500 at some point in the not too distant future. It looks like we'll be recording that sometime this summer. And so I'd love to hear some ideas from our audience. If we could do something special for you on our 500th episode, we've got a little time to think about it now. So just planting the seed. Think about it. 500 episodes for the RecPoker podcast. Pretty amazing. I'm proud of what everyone here has done to make it as great as it has. And I can't wait to get to 500 and then another 500 after that. All right. So without further ado, let's hear from the one and only Tom Bauer. All right. Well, I'm happy to be joined by Tom Bauer. We were talking earlier about how much we were looking forward to the interview here. We've also got Troy Chapman and Joe Koulis in the room for the conversation. So, Tom, first of all, thank you for coming on to the RecPoker podcast. You mentioned you'd seen a couple episodes already, so you knew what you were getting into, man.
Yeah, look, it's an absolute privilege for the invite. I've seen a couple of fellow Aussies come on board. And just excitingly, I think it's great what you guys are looking to put together. There's been a mixture of sort of local entertaining players like Luke Hanna from Australia and mindset control guys like Brendan Ruby and also Shannon, who was focusing on Mixed Games Academy. So it's terrific to see that sort of celebrated and being welcomed in the community as well.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that we are, there's this, here at RecPoker, there's a focus on sort of the spectrum of poker players. And it's such an interesting world. It's such an interesting industry. You've got people with various experience and skill levels that are all contributing to make the game greater. So it's nice to be able to kind of shine a light around. So I like to start with our guests by kind of asking them to give themselves a little context within the poker industry. So if our audience hasn't heard of you already, how would you describe your role in the poker industry to someone that you were chatting with at a cocktail party or in an elevator?
Sure. So I got started in poker probably in around 03. We in Australia have what we call pub poker leagues. So effectively that's pub poker tournaments held inside pubs or local venues. From there, I moved over into working for Poker Stars. So I spent 8 years with Poker Stars, which was amazing. My first role there was a collusion investigator. So as a poker specialist, spent a couple of years watching and looking for patterns in play and investigating players, and then moved into training. So I became the training coordinator for that company, teaching other players how to play poker and how to do the work from within the company. But I really fell in love with poker, watching poker on TV. So back in sort of 01, 02, I was watching late night poker with Donachie O'Day and Devilfish and the UK six-handed glass tables. And that's really what my passion was. Even working at Poker Stars, I got to meet basically all of the pros and Negreanu and Ivy, and that was an exciting thing for me. But I've always been in love with the organization of poker. So for me, it was meeting Danny McDonough, who was the head of World Poker Tours and tournament directing. And what I loved was watching poker on film. It shouldn't be as exciting as it is, but we put heart rate monitors on players and we see players sitting with 160 beats per minute playing a card game. It's fascinating. So 6 years ago, I was fortunate enough to start LCA Poker, which is Lights, Camera, Action Poker. And we now film and broadcast virtually every tournament in Australia. We work with all of the major brands, now including the casino. So we provide commentary for the casinos, as well as major tours around the country.
That's amazing. We've here at RecPoker, we've done a lot of learning material based on like final table streams that we've accessed for different casinos or tours. And it is a fantastic way to learn. I know it's fun, but we also it's more fun when you win. Poker is more fun when you win. So if you can have some fun, but also learn something along the way, that's kind of the angle that we take here. So I can see why that would be really in demand and a really valuable service. So that seems like that couldn't have happened by accident. How did you end up becoming kind of like the go-to organization that provides the service for all the poker in Australia?
We basically put it down to a number of things. We had an opportunity to take an exclusivity. So interestingly enough, the guy who invented the software that runs virtually all of the RFID tables in the world is an Australian. We did have an opportunity to take an exclusivity with him for the Australian market, but we just decided that we were going to strive with sort of passion and determination and get into it. I had a bit of a network at the time, so I thought I'd have a head start on everyone else. And what people don't really understand, my expectation is I think we have about 15 or 16 RFID tables that I know of in Australia. 3 of them run. And effectively I fly around and run all of the other ones. It's something that is actually quite a a task. So we look at every single betting action that is entered onto a stream. Effectively, that's a poker stenographer. Someone is sitting there typing in every single action that happens. And you have to be pretty passionate about the game to want to do that. And fortunately, that suits me to a T. So I'm one of those guys that really do have the privilege of watching live poker. In 6 years, we broadcast just under 3,000 hours of live poker, which is pretty impressive. Like, we've put a lot of work into it. So whilst I think, the competitors will eventually come, it just hasn't seemed to happen. It seems to be that we are the guys that do it.
Well, it sounds like you're doing a great job. Can't complain about that. I know Joe's going to have some questions about your based work, not to put it in too roughly a box. And I know Joe's got some questions, and I know Troy's got some questions about being involved in the leagues and the broadcasting. I had a question. So you've been watching all this poker professionally now for so long. How has that affected your own pleasure with playing the game? Do you play often? Did you come into this as an enthusiast and then just developed a business around it? How do you feel about playing poker now?
So I have always really enjoyed the game. I am a player, but I've never promoted or marketed myself as a poker player. I focus on cash, not tournament poker. And purely that comes down to two things. For me, I haven't exercised what I call that muscle of almost doing it again. Tournament poker is a brutal and hard game to play.
Yes.
You can do everything right. You can, play perfect poker for 3 days and you lose an 80-20. And what we really focus on at the moment is those guys finishing from about 11th place to 6th place in major tournaments. So lots of play, deep run, but it's just missing that life-changing money, all the big money, which is always up top. And exercising that muscle and that resilience to come back and do it again, that takes a lot of work. And personally, that's not for me. I'm happy to sit at my cash table and make my money and go that way. But I've always just had a passion for the operating side. I really wanted to be a TD. I like operation. I like poker. I love the game, but I like making my money every day, guaranteed, as opposed to having to punt at it.
Yeah,
One thing you
the
spoke
cash
about
games are more
before-
fun for that. Sorry, yeah, please continue.
For me, with the game tape and the final tables, I do think the biggest service and the way that we've really marketed LCA poker is based on an education model. There is so much information available with these final table footage and streams to just improve your game. And we know from the players who are putting that study in off the felt, they're the guys that are having that result and success. We just, in every other professional sport, we talk about game tape and watching how you played and reviewing your match. Live poker streaming gives you the opportunity to do that. And with all of that mathematic information, as well as all that tells information, it's such a privilege. So we really push people to review it. You've got to do the work when you go home. The tournament doesn't end at that point. You've got to go home and do your homework, rewatch what you've done. And the beauty of poker, of course, it's a long-term game. We come back and do it all again.
I love it. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
That's actually a really good segue for what I wanted to ask you, Tom. Over the years, I've only had the pleasure of being on a couple final tables that you've streamed, but what have you seen over time where the players that constantly run deep and or are cashing, the guys out there who are consistently performing well, what are some of the attributes that you consistently see amongst them?
So interestingly, when I really wanted to get a RFID table for my very first thing, what I thought it would do, firstly, again, being a cash game player, I really thought it would just create an interesting dynamic. I thought people would play differently on the RFID table because they want to show off or be different or, make big moves on camera.
Massive bluffs.
Yeah, I really thought that would create a very much a different dynamic in my cash game market, but it didn't. Interestingly, it didn't. People sort of forget that they're on camera and they just do what they do. So there definitely is a comfortability to be factored into that within tournament poker. Many of the brands that we stream for don't let players watch the stream. Some do let them watch the stream, or that information comes back. So there's definitely an adaptability that needs to happen with that information. And unfortunately, with the speed of basically social media, our delay is usually now 30 or even 20 minutes sometimes. As a poker purist, I'd like that delay to actually be longer. I think, if I make a really good bluff, I want them to be hurting for an hour. I don't want them to have the information that I bluffed them through in 20 minutes. But that's just how it is with social media these days. But so look, what I see from
Sorry,
players who
on
are
that.
doing,
Sorry, just on that, Tom. Do you think it ruins the game when people are sitting there at a final table watching the delay?
I think it ruins a
takes
couple
out
of
a lot of
things.
the-
So I think
Yep.
it does. It destroys a lot of things. So as a broadcaster, I think it ruins the broadcast. I want players engaging and talking. Last thing I want to do is film 9 players looking at a phone. As a poker coach, I think it ruins your ability to focus on the game because you're not focusing on the current dynamic. You're focusing on 20 minutes ago in the past. The better poker players who are utilizing that information have someone at home who's watching it for them and are feeding them the things that they need to know. If I'm focusing on a game 20 minutes ago and focusing on a game now, I'm not attentive where I need to be, and I'm missing that table dynamic. So personally, I would much prefer phones to be in Velosoft bags or off the table. If we have to put the stream up, we put a TV in the pit, and they can watch it that way. But I really do think we lose a lot in that delay from people living on their phones.
Cool.
So in answer to your first question, though, the things that I see that are really important to improve that game, and we do get to see those consistent same performers. It comes back to the quote from Rounders, what are these, the 9 luckiest guys in the world?
Yeah.
They're not. They're obviously the most talented players. The biggest thing that I see is really needs to come back to bankroll management. We are blessed with live poker in Australia being enormous. There is a series on every week. So 3 days ago, I was 900 kilometers away filming a $2 million series. I drove for 8 hours. I've set up here today, and I'm about to film another 1.5, maybe $2 million series this week. I'm going to go to another state next week and do the exact same thing. There is just so much poker happening. But the key to that performance is being able to afford and play that a game. And if you're not financially comfortable to play the games that you're playing, then you're not going to be able to make the moves that you need to make. You have to be able to afford to lose your buy-in. And if you're not comfortable with that, or if this means that you're not paying rent this week, or you're eating baked beans for the fortnight, then you're not going to play the best game that you need to play. And bankroll management is so important. Now that may come down to staking or backing or however you do that, but you are much better off not playing a game than you are playing a game hamstrung by bankroll management. Once we get that under control, the 2 biggest things that I would see on a table that needs to be improved from players, firstly, is pace of play. So we definitely see guys feeling pressure or peer group pressure to make decisions or to perform or to just not be slowing the game down in any way. I think you need to be completely confident in taking control of that pace of play. And you can use that almost to weaponize yourself on the table as well. So if the game is playing particularly fast, you can deliberately slow that pace of play down, and that will frustrate other fast players. Or if the game is playing slow, then you can push and call clock on people or just take control of that. So taking control of pacings, but most importantly, being comfortable with your own decision-making process. You can take as long as you want until someone calls clock on you, and give yourself that pace to actually take play. The other biggest thing that I'm seeing is the change in bet sizing. So if we talk about 03 through to 07, standard open is 3x and away we go. And we really are looking at these 2.1, even min click opens. So when we're opening bet sizings, we're reducing the amount of chips. And the fundamental philosophy there is basically risking the least amount of chips to accomplish what it is that you want to do. If you're trying to push your opponent away overhand, you're only risking the smallest amount of chips to do so. If you're trying to extract value, then you're trying to get as many chips in there as possible. And if only it was that easy. Unfortunately, that's the hardest thing to do in poker. But bringing in that bet sizing will give you extra chips to play. And then finally, the things that we really want to look at studying, if we are talking about that late stage and final table poker, again, that 11th through 6th, is keeping our stack relevant. So when we're under that 20 to 15 big blind range, understanding what our shove ranges are and playing that tournament to win that tournament. Obviously we have ICM considerations where we need to start laddering, but we do need to put our pressure on players, and we want to make sure we're taking in what I always say in Australia is my favorite thing: yummy, 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 uncontested money. So that is the best thing that you can be getting. We want to be taking in pots uncontested. We want to be using that aggressive stack. We know what our shove ranges are. And when you get in the labs and do the study, you'll find out they're a lot wider than we're comfortable with. So getting comfortable with that uncomfortable, that's the biggest stuff that I think the guys who are consistently succeeding, that's where their success comes from.
And the other one you like is hashtag stop the chop. I know that
Stop
one.
the chop. I'm a big fan of Stop the Chop. We think we'll get it happening. So yummy, yummy, yummy uncontested money is mine. My fellow commentator is trying to get Pocket Jacks known as the sexy boys. So when we get both of those things happening, LCA poker, that's it. We've done everything we want to do. So
That's nice.
And as another question, when you're obviously a big fan of watching poker, and I know with LCAP you do a lot of no limit. Do you enjoy watching any of the mixed games out there at all?
So for me, my favorite game is actually high-low four card. As a player, I think that's possibly one of the best games on the market at the moment. I think there's a huge edge in that market at the moment for players that don't know how to play it, which is always fun. We recently had a really strong push into OFC in Australia about 2 years ago, and there was interesting little edges in that as well. So it's fun to find those games where people are playing them badly. Fortunately, there's plenty of Hold'em that's played really badly as well. The streaming content to it, now that we've sort of welcomed in mixed games more to the tour with Shannon, who you guys spoke to a few weeks ago, we have an expectation that we will film more of them. We have broadcast and streamed a heads up Hold'em match, which was a Hold'em Omaha rotation match between Joe Hashem and Mike Mizraki a few years ago. But it just turned into a cooler hand, unfortunately. So it was over and done with pretty quickly. From a practical standpoint, for us filming mixed games, the biggest difficulty is actually just educating players on where to put their cards on the readers. Sometimes it's quite hard for players to put 2 cards on a reader because it's just not natural to them. Getting them to place 4 cards the way that we need them to becomes a frustrating sort of process. So that's realistically the reason we don't film a lot of it.
Usually the problem's between the table and the chair, right? Usually
Yeah.
the issue is somewhere between the table and the chair for that kind of stuff.
So for us, it's a really fun point too. So we obviously want to capture and broadcast everything, which has been really interesting, but we don't want to mess with the integrity of their decision at any point in time. So we communicate with the dealer tells the player to move their cards, but we want to be really mindful about not interrupting their thought process or flow while they're doing that. And that just becomes complicated when we start leaning into Omaha.
That's right.
Very cool. All right. No, I'll just might throw it over to Joe. Joe's got some questions.
Perfect.
About the other side of what Tom does.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in with one first, and then we'll hear from Joe in just a second. So I was asking earlier about watching all this footage and sort of the effect that that's had on your pleasure as a player. I'm sure it must also have kind of honed your skills a little bit as a player, but I'm actually curious. You mentioned this part of your career where you were working on collusion and sort of like body language and that kind of thing. I imagine being responsible for recording and watching all this final table footage, that must have also just given you a lot of that kind of game tape as well. Is that true? And is that something that's helped with your analysis or your ability to analyze that kind of stuff?
Yeah, very much so. So the collusion background was all exclusively online. So that was interesting that PokerStars, they had a very, very proactive collusion department. So it was self-reported. So it was internal and external. So we would investigate an external complaint about collusion, but we also had software which looked for patterns in play and triggered those warnings as well. One of the things that I guess I'm sort of surprised by, we really haven't seen a great amount of it. In 6 years, I've had to pause a tournament twice for hands which I suspected to be collusive. I saw a pocket queens folding one time with 4 bigs, which was an unusual fold. But we actually stopped the tournament. It's the only time in 6 years I've ever had to do so.
And did they say that they don't play those kind of drawing hands?
So yeah, it turned out the guy truly was a cheaper price point tournament. It was a massive FT for him, and he just wanted to ladder. He just truly didn't want to risk. The fold was to a person that he had no relationship to, so we were a lot more confident in that. And the player who actually won the hand put up a story, just couldn't believe it. Like, how does he get pocket queens to fold? Under the gun with 4 bigs, it just makes no sense at all. But so we really don't see a great deal of it. It's something that we're always very mindful of. It'll be interesting as the mixed games come in. Doing collusion, for example, a Badoogie collusion investigation is almost an impossibility because mostly players just don't know what they're doing as opposed to they're colluding.
Right. Yeah, true. That's a good point.
the majority of poker, realistically, and any of the soft play collusive stuff, is really that borderline where partners are playing or husband and wife are playing, and whilst they are not intentionally chip dumping or colluding with each other, maybe they are soft playing. And we've probably all been guilty of that when we first got into poker without even knowing it was a thing. We go to a casino with our friend and we try not to knock our friend out. Whereas policing or pushing, you're here to win, you would need to play within the spirit of the game. It's fortunately not something that I've really had to step in and do a great deal of.
So sorry,
Yeah,
I will ask one last question on that. Because you're not technically a TD at a tournament that's live, if you happen to see something where, because you've got the benefit of cards up, are you obligated at that point in time? Do you have a responsibility to say something to a TD to say that I suspect old mate over here is soft playing? Because obviously he can't be cheating, right? Because he doesn't have the access to a stream, but he could be soft playing.
Correct. So there's a couple of things that we do. So I'm not in any stage hired in a consultancy role in that role. If I'm commentating on the delay. So I'm talking on the delay at the same time the viewers at home are watching it. So in that case, I'm already 20 minutes or 30 minutes behind anyway. If I'm tracking, up until several months ago, I did have access to whole cards face up. After the Robbie Jade scandal, effectively, the way that we actually track and record now has been changed quite significantly. So again, the inventor of the software, who is Australian, wrote a fascinating article which was called "The Elephant in the Room / Booth," which basically was a discussion that if there was any RFID cheating going on, our software is so encrypted that players can't access or interrupt or get access to the whole cards at any way. The only way that could have been happening was via a leak behind the scenes or in the commentary room. So we now, for the first time ever, a major rehaul of the software, nobody has live whole card access behind the scenes anymore. It is all face down for us. It goes up live when the stream goes live. So at that point, we would still address any controversy or collusion at that point, but nobody in the country or nobody in the world now has access to live whole cards.
Yeah, you're commentating 20 minutes in the past.
No, so I'm commentating.
Sort of.
Correct. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm commentating on the delayed feed. So I'm seeing what you see. I don't see live whole cards at all, and that lets us engage with the viewers and questions as well. We try to distance ourselves from the actual table. So whilst we may know when bust outs have happened, we still want to see the exciting stuff. But it's been a really significant change. And one of the questions we get a lot from the RFID question for players who don't understand poker is, well, can we use it to cheat, or how do we see access, or surely we can do this? And now having that removed has been a fantastic thing. It just means that there is absolutely no way that players or us or commentary or anyone can do effectively a Mike Postle. It's probably unfortunate we talk about Jade Robbie because I think fairly conclusively we see that wasn't at any point a leak in booth. She didn't have access to whole cards. Mike Postle, however, we certain did. And both of those now have been resolved by this technicality of rewriting the software so that it just doesn't exist. And that's great for poker.
Cool. Awesome.
So I've finally been given the floor from my lovely colleagues who keep interrupting me. So I have a lot of questions about the work that you've done or that you describe in terms of your YouTube videos that I was able to find online concerning body language, reading it, and things like that. And it's very interesting to me because it's always been people I'm a neuropsychologist, and it's always been identified to me, well, you'll blow poker games up, and I've always made the art because of being able to read people. And I've always said, well, that's just such a small part of what it is. The math is such a much larger part about it. And I don't mean to say that it doesn't exist, but it's actually very difficult to do, in my opinion. So I'm curious what your background was, and what kinds of things that you're pushing, where you get your information from in terms of
Sure.
that process.
So I've studied body language through the Ekman Group, the Ekman Institute or EIA Group. Paul Ekman is essentially the expert in facial recognition, body language, and muscle groups. He developed and designed the FACS system, which is the facial coding muscle system. It's so important they use that in animation studios. So Disney and Pixar all use that muscle analysis group. What he discovered, and one of his biggest things, is that there are 7 universal facial expressions that are used culturally across all primates. So interestingly, that is right throughout. It's not cultural, and we represent and move our muscles and facial groups in exactly the same way. So that then leads to then followings of micro expressions and micro tells. But what I focus on are physiopsychological things that your body is doing that you can't stop it from doing. So when it comes to body language and tells, we talk about things that are reversible or controllable, and how then reliable they are, and then more importantly, how we punish them. The university is through the University of Manchester, and that's where the Ekman Group is based. When I attended the training there, I was with FBI and CIA guys. A week in, one of the guys had to fly out. He was pretty distressed, and we're like, "Oh, what's going wrong?" And he's, "Well, I have to leave. I literally have to fly to Afghanistan and do a terrorist interrogation tonight." And meanwhile, I was flying back to Australia to broadcast poker and be a magician. So it sort of wasn't quite the same level.
You didn't get on the wrong flights, did you? And
no, it could have been awkward. But the difficulty, or probably the disappointing fact, was when I sat at the training, the first thing that they said about 10 minutes into it was, okay, there are 3 areas where this won't work. And one of those is poker, and one of those is magic, and one of those is acting. And I literally said, well, right, that's 2 of my 3 things just immediately eliminated. And the reason it doesn't work as easily as we think it was is effectively when we sit at a poker table, we're giving ourselves permission to lie. So I know when I sit at this table, you are going to lie to me, and I'm going to lie to you. And so because we have those permissions that are granted, we're not going to show or demonstrate the same sort of what we call as truth leakage. So we don't really look towards deception tells, which is that means he's lying. We look at the things that your body is just expressing that you are still telling truths. But because we've given ourselves permission, and so the same applies with magic, and the same applies with acting. I know that he's crying, but he's crying in an acting way. It's not a real way. And so, unfortunately, what that means is some of those body language things that we're used to. You'll have to excuse my blinds here in the tournament background.
Yeah, you're obviously calling from a casino floor. That's okay.
Where you're located.
Yeah,
We've got
right. Yeah.
Just about to stream a $2,500 buy-in. I think there's 100 runners so far, and Late Reg Open for 2 hours. So
yeah,
we think that should be a good tournament today.
So what we see is those tells. No worries there, Tom. Yeah, please continue.
they don't really work the same way that we expect them to work. And the person who's done the most work on that is probably Zachary Elwood, who writes tells, poker tells, and more poker tells. Prior to that, Joe Navarro and Phil Hellmuth. Navarro was an ex-FBI analyst, and his book, Read 'em and Reap, which is a combined book with Hellmuth and Navarro. It's quite good in that it investigates body language tells, but what Zachary was able to do further to that was talk about why the psychology doesn't work on a table because of that permission to lie. And so that's what we really start to look at. What I investigate. Oh no, jump in.
No, I was just going to say, I think along the same lines, it's as you play more poker, the level of anxiety that you have even about doing a lying behavior decreases because of the state-dependent learning that you might see in that spot. Makes it easier to see it as an okay place to do that behavior that really moral people don't want to do, which is to take money from people by lying. So
yeah, very much so, and getting comfortable with that uncomfortability will calm and slow that adrenal responses that we talk about. So the things that I really focus on with body language tells and when I teach towards is those reliability is the first one, but reliability and reversibility and controllability. So we look at adrenal responses, we look at balance, we look at there's fascinating areas of study within forensic linguistics with speech play and patterns of play. But the key to what I start to look at investigating then is how do we punish it? So much of poker body language is really brought back to mindfulness, which we're seeing a big push towards within poker training and coaching at the moment. We have a lot of mindset coaches and being focused and attentive. Interestingly, the adult mindset attention span, we've dropped from something like 12 minutes per hour of being able to be attentive to 8 or 6 minutes based on just social media responses and triggers and information. When you're sitting at a poker felt for 13 hours, being focused and attentive for even half of that time is really, really difficult to do. So we talk a lot about basically what it is that you can be to be mindful and attentive and relaxed at the table. And then you're just looking for those behaviors in play, because it's the behavioral changes that you're going to notice. Unfortunately, it just isn't as simple as, oh, well, his eye's twitching, therefore it must mean he's doing this. But what I try to talk about, which is what we spoke to with Troy before about pacing of play, then is how do we punish those things? And you've got so much opportunity to just make yourself comfortable at the table and play with speech play. So when you're identifying tells, basically all of your micro expressions or any of your facial expressions work on essentially a curve. So if you're surprised, for example, a surprised face will only be a very quick reaction. It's surprise and then moving on to whatever the next thing is. And so we talk about that being the point of stimulus. So that stimulus, which can be up to 2 microseconds, would be me making a bet. That's going to trigger a response in someone who is going to react, and then they're going to be able to, within 2 seconds, be back to normal and controlling their response. So as a poker player, I need to be constantly putting those stimulus things out there. And we probably don't want to be completely obnoxious with speech play or looking at things that are out of comfortability for ourselves. But if someone's looking uncomfortable, I don't see why you can't ask them why. Like, think about that as a concept. This guy's looking really upset about his hand. You go, why are you breathing so fast all of a sudden? And I spend a lot of time in my coaching talking about these ideas and deliberately look at ways of effectively weaponizing yourself on the table, because the goal is, if we're sitting at the felt, to make money. We don't have to be completely obnoxious to do it. We can actually have a lot of fun with it. We've spoken about.
I'm sorry.
No, you're right. We've spoken about an LCAP, which is LCAP or Lights Go Action Poker, the LCAP clap, and literally whilst playing, and the guy on your table is sitting there making a decision, to loudly just clap your hands together and see what happens. It's a really fascinating stimulus point, and it'll break down into then frustration or anger, or a genuine smile, which is shown in eyes, and happiness and laughing, and it's a really interesting gauge on hand strength. So there's just lots of fun ways to weaponize that.
Well, it's interesting that you use the term weaponize it, because I do think that the problem for most people with speech play is that's another violation, right? It's you're stepping up first, you're playing a game where you're lying, right? And people don't like to lie in the first place. So they try not to do it, which is where they usually will get themselves into trouble by releasing more information than they're supposed to. But if you're going to actually take that next step and then try to elicit things, you're essentially breaking a social contract that everybody has that will be respectful of one another, because you're not, right? You're essentially stepping over a line and saying, why are you so nervous? Psychologists do that all the time in a session, and it pisses people off, but it gets them to actually start talking about the thing that's upsetting them, because emotional responses usually lead to verbal discussions that they don't want. But you have to be willing to deal with the blowback that's going to come when they're angry with you for forcing that out of them. So it's an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah, and it's really difficult. So we talk about deliberate controls of table personas. So I might be a happy, nice guy on the table, or I might be the egotistical guy with headphones on who's really aggressive. What we tend to push towards in that space is, unfortunately, you just really have to be sincere to yourself. If I try to be Will Kassouf and I'm just not sincerely Will Kassouf, it's going to be really bad for me. I mean, look, we can argue his integrity for the cows coming home. The first hand where he talks out pocket queens is probably a very well done hand. The rest of the tournament broadcast and his further stealing of roulette chips off a friend is probably less integrity. which is why he lost his sponsorship deals, and away we go. But we need to look at those sort of things in regards to the power of speech plan and why it's important. I have a lot of fun with this stuff. So I talk about ways that you can deliberately punish, but I do it in a way to get your juices flowing or creative things happening. So a couple of fun ones that we look at. We offer, like, sit at the table and offer everyone chewing gum when you sit down. You go, hey guys, does anyone want a piece of gum? And all right, so instantly you're now the nice guy on the table. You've sat down, you've offered everyone a piece of gum. But what you've also actually done is create an adrenal response for everybody. So now you have a chewing behavior of every player on the table, and you have an adrenal response, which your fight or flight mechanism will stop your salivatory process. And you're going to see players who speed up or slow down their pace in chewing gum, which is just free information for you. And so it's a really interesting sort of journey. And now you're just a nice guy, but you've also actually just given yourself a whole lot of extra information. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean anything in the same way. The eye twitch doesn't necessarily mean anything. We have to match it through with pace of plays, but we're establishing further behavior information that we didn't have before. Really, no, jump in.
I was going to say that it's, bringing it back to rec players, because rec players are always looking for, what is that magical sign? And everybody understands the get up and get your jacket sign is probably, a reverse tell, and they can all work on that. But I would be interested to hear if my impression is probably that you have a U-shaped curve in terms of how different things react, or how different people react to different adrenal responses. So individuals who are just starting out to play, I think you're going to have an adrenal response no matter what happens, right? You have the best hand, you have 7, 8, or you have pocket 2s or something. It's always going to increase every single time you're putting money into the pot, and you're not going to get a lot of differentiation. At the high end, you're going to have very calm people who have done this over and over and over again, particularly if they're playing a lot of GTO, that it's not going to raise those responses as much, and it'll be harder to detect. But in the bottom end of that U curve is where people start to differentiate between, well, this is a good hand and this is a bad hand. This is when I need to be nervous when I'm putting money in, whereas this is when I don't have to be nervous. And I'd be interested to see, I don't have any data on it.
So for us, I mean, it really comes down to probably the first example that everyone sees is that shaking hand at the poker table, which, we traditionally apply to, oh God, they must be nervous. But more often than not, there's actually an adrenal response with a strength tell as a reliable, I can't help this, I now have adrenaline, I'm winning this hand. The key for us in all of that space is to baseline your opponents. Now, I fell in love with poker due to the social aspect of poker. You're enjoying people, you're people watching. And the key to being a successful poker player in that space is to invest in it. It's so easy to come into tournaments now and focus on your phone or your headphones or your music. When I first started pub poker in 2003, it was very social. You'd sit down at the table and you'd shake hands with the other 9 players you were playing against. Hey, good to meet you. And you just talk to each other. And I don't feel like players are doing that as much anymore. And what they're not doing then is they're missing huge amounts of information that's available to them. You should be sitting down and just engaging with the other players on the table. Understanding what this tournament means to this player is an enormous thing for you. Knowing that they've satellited in or they're on their 10th bullet is a really significant piece of information. And we can stereotype and guess what these players are doing based on how they look. He's got a gold watch on, he must be rich, he can play this tournament. We've got a wonderful player that Troy will be familiar with, Robert Demillion, who's an Australian player. He was Sydney based. He's a very, very calm, polite, white-haired gentleman, and he's an absolute crusher. He's got 6 figures in live earnings. He's recently moved from Sydney to Queensland, so he's moved interstate in Australia, and the Queensland players just didn't know him. And he was so underestimated at the table for the first 3 months because, he's just a doddering old white-haired man. He's an absolute crusher. And
I sat with him at the Gold Coast at a 2-5 table and just watched him just grab people's souls and put them in a little box.
Yeah. And look, that can be as simple as, what's your name? Hey, do you play much? Like, where you from? we don't need to be Google Hendon mobbing our entire tables, but understanding who those players are and where that baseline is definitely going to help with that U curve of where we are and what this player knows. And we've really got to just have those conversations. And that doesn't push any of our boundaries. That's how probably most of us fell in love with poker as a game, the social aspect of it. Let's go back to that. Put the phone in the pocket, talk to the players, and sit there with the information that you've got available to you.
Yeah,
I think phones should be banned at the table. Hallelujah. So
no, I think you're absolutely right, because I do think that the quiet tables killed the game in the first place. But I have learned more about the people at the table and Won More Money live by just dropping some sort of political discussion into the middle of the table and explode around and then be like, okay, well, and because people just can't hide as much when they're engaged in particular discussions. It just does make it uncomfortable sometimes for some people that don't deal with that, or it can be difficult because it forces you to, you talked about sustaining your attention based upon, I can't sustain to watch, but doing that sort of speech play requires you to actually divide your attention significantly to keep track of what's going on in terms of the hands that you're playing, but also keep track of what the behaviors are around. And it's a more difficult skill, I think, than people give it credit for.
Yeah, but it's just something that we have the opportunity to practice every time we're at the felt. It's really difficult to practice GTO because it's dependent on our whole card distribution, which we can't control. Yeah, we can put in time in the labs and we can play sims and we can do all of that stuff. But exploitative play or table talk or just comfortability, we literally can be doing it every single time we sit down. There's no reason for us to not talk and get used to talking to people. Except for I'm more interested in watching Facebook reels while I'm playing poker. And that just seems like a waste to me. I really do feel like there are a lot of players at the moment in the market that I just don't know how to push into that scene of when you're going to play poker, understanding you're actually going to do something. It's so unique to the sport of poker. If I'm entering a running race, I'm making sure I've warmed up. I'm wearing my joggers. I'm doing everything I need to do it. Whereas poker players, if they've got themselves to the venue mostly on time, they're sort of feeling like they're ready to go. And there's so much pre-game work that just needs to happen in sense of being prepared, sitting at the table and recognizing what you're there to do. And we do all of that work. We should sit down, we get ourselves mindful and attentive, and then we're ready to hopefully take all the chips.
Just as a quick follow-up in terms of why you have to be, where I learned that you actually have to, that it can be difficult, is that there was somebody who wanted, one day we were just playing a 1-2 cash game, and he decided he was going to speech play everybody, was just kind of, sending little jabs at everybody along, and he gets ticked off at somebody and decides he's going to pull him in, gets him to fold his hand, and then throws his hand and gets it all in, and then throws his hand into the muck and says, yeah, I got you to fold. I didn't, I had the best hand. But what he didn't pay attention to was that there was still somebody live who then just called and stacked him because he hadn't paid attention to everything that was going on around him. So you do have to be a little careful in terms of what you do. But anyway, that's fascinating. I really appreciate you spending some time talking about it.
Possibly my favorite thing that we've filmed would have to be a reverse tell, which was mostly the fascinating thing of someone being almost too attentive. So we had a guy deep into the tank. He looks over at his opponent who's on his phone. He then makes the call. The guy who he's called tables the stone cold nuts. And he said, but I saw you on your phone. You were booking an Uber. And I figured you were going home. And the guy's like, no, I was canceling the Uber that I'd already ordered. And all on camera as a fantastic reverse tell. So when we're being really attentive, we just got to make sure we're getting that information and putting it towards the right direction.
I love that. Yeah, I think poker really is a leveling war, isn't it? I mean, it's knowing what level your opponent's on and trying to be one level higher. And I think reverse tells are really that kind of rarefied air where you need to know exactly what your opponent's thinking. And if they're paying attention enough to notice what you're doing, to know enough about tells, to then take that to heart. And like, that's quite a parlay, the reverse tells. Do you think there's much advantage to players
I
trying
don't
to
think
use fake
there's
tells or
a
false tells?
huge amount of players who can do it well enough. Honestly, I think you end up leveling yourself more often than not.
Yeah.
We've got some really interesting ones with some very, very bad looking tells. We had a player very recently with his tongue out, which was an interesting thing. I end up recording it and taking the player along at the end of it. He was licking his lips to the point where he actually kept his tongue out.
It
And
wasn't Michael Jordan, was it?
no,
Yeah.
we really questioned it, but the hand itself did all the work for him. There was nothing from his tell that was doing any of the work at that point. Being in control of yourself, but then understanding exactly like you say, Jim, what level your opponent is on to then misinterpret that tell is probably really difficult to do. The only one that I would subscribe that is consistently able to be reversed well would have to be in relation to timing tells. You can take control of your timing tells and then you can fake and represent those and you can punish some people with that. But any of the body language stuff, to do it authentically and to be caught doing it, which is then what you're trying to do, and then to have your opponent utilize what you think information you're putting out there, there's a lot of stuff there that's just going to be more difficult than it's worth.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Well, Tom, I really appreciate your time. This has been a really interesting conversation. If folks want to work with you, I hear you offer some coaching. It's not just a question of taking part in the streams and the production values of things. Can you just talk a little bit about what kind of people you like to work with, what that experience is like, and how people can get in touch with you?
Sure. So we have a couple of things. We do run boot camps and training across Australia. We also have a custom film studio and library and education set up in one state in Australia as well. But we do run online training and coaching as well. One of our commentators is really, really strong in GTO. So he does analysts and GTO type stuff. I focus on mindset and body language and do training and education around that. The best place that anyone can find us is just on Facebook at LCA Poker, which is just lights, camera, action poker. And of course, find us on Twitch. We do commentary for all of the big games in Australia, and we're twitch.tv/LCA Poker. We'll film and broadcast and commentate pretty much everything throughout the country. We have a packed schedule for the rest of the year. There are some huge things in Australian poker coming, which is just great.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I hope you get a pickup from some of our audience. When this episode comes out, I want everyone to go and check out Tom on Twitter and Facebook. And as he says, I'll put the links in the show notes so folks will have a chance to click on those and get involved. One more time, Tom, thank you so much. And I hope we get to talk again. So I feel we could have done this for a whole other hour, but I know you got work to do. We're going to maybe have to pick this up another time.
Straight into the broadcast. Thanks for the opportunity, guys. And for those looking to see Troy on the felt, I'm sure you'll see him on one of our broadcasts again soon. So you'll be able
That's the plan.
The original sexy boy. So
The original sexy boy.
That's where it's at.
All right, cheers. Well, thanks everybody.
Thanks,
We'll
guys.
cut back to the rest of the episode here. All right. Well, I love these offline interviews because when I come back to the show, I can see everyone's smiling faces and we're all like, hey man, as far as we know, that went great. Like that was like a flawless experience, right, Rob?
Always good to hear from the other side of the world how poker is flourishing. So it's always fun to hear from Australia how the poker world is treating everybody down there.
And as far as I know, that may have been the best interview we've ever done.
I'm sure it just went on and on and on and on and on and on.
Bro, that's usually just the question asking portion of it. I've been known to ramble just a tad. But in all seriousness, I'm sure that was a fun time. And I hope you enjoyed that. While we are going to roll into the next portion of the show, I'm going to mention just a couple events that are coming up at Running Aces. By the time you're listening to this, you can still make it if you're listening live. The Mid-Stakes Poker Tour is coming to town later this week. It'll be there on March 23rd, and it's going to have a lot of fun events planned right through the beginning of April. And then the Running Aces anniversary event is a $500 buy-in from April 26th to April 30th, and I hope people have a chance to go and have some fun with the with the Running Aces crowd as possible. I see a great comment here in the chat from Troy Chapman. Why don't we do a speed date for the 500th? get as many of our previous guests on as possible. I kind of like that idea. We could just have like each, yeah, we last 1,000 years, says Joe. Yeah, good point. Good point. And I see we've got some interesting conversations already going in the YouTube chat. Thanks, Danny. I'm also excited for this one. That Tom Bauer guy does seem like quite a character. So I can't wait to, in the future, have the interview that we are now listening to after. Yes, I got that out in one. I don't know who BitBoy is, Tinkerbear, but thanks for swinging by. And yeah, so I think at this point, folks, if you are interested, you should start typing the words food bank into the chat there, because food insecurity does exist on a spectrum. You never know who might be hungry in your own neighborhood or in your own community. It's not always who you expect. Sometimes we all need a little help. And the best way to help people is by putting food in the bellies of hungry folks. So go type the words food bank in there, and then we will see who the winner is going to be. And every week we're going to be giving away a prize. As I say, if you're not already a RecPoker Premium member, the prize will be a free month at RecPoker. If you are already a RecPoker Premium member, then you're going to be able to choose from among our different learning partners a month of membership with them. So right now we've been talking to Range Trainer Pro, Learn Pro Poker, PokerCoaching.com. We've got a couple other irons in the fire here. We're just working out some details. But all the great learning partners that we love to work with here that contribute to our own premium membership program, it's a great way to kind of let RecPoker be that platform that lets you launch into the poker learning career of your own. Yeah, John Somsky.
Well, so does that mean if I get things right, I believe that RecPoker is probably the most economical of all of those options.
It definitely is, yes.
So you're telling me that if you are a premium member at Rec.Poker, then the food bank lottery is worth even more when you listen to it than if you're not.
It is. That's exactly what I'm telling you, John. I'd say in some cases 2, 3, 4 times as valuable. And let alone, that's not even counting the folks that just use the code RecPoker to get their first month for only $5. You know, and I will say, I've said this before, if you win the competition, I'm not going to like timestamp your membership. If you just happen to sign up for RecPoker Premium that night and then send me an email the next morning, who knows what could happen? Maybe you'll end up getting that premium membership prize after all. You know, I'm just saying, the world, it's a crazy world out there. Yeah, Joseph.
I just want to say that and be the first person to announce that as a part of his study into the next winner, Rob Washam has offered to read Goodnight Moon to somebody who will go to bed in order to, you know, as just an inducement.
I've never even heard of Goodnight Moon.
You have no children?
Walken did it best. Walken did it best on The Simpsons, if memory serves.
Well, let's see. My youngest is 40, so what does that tell you?
It's an old book, but it's just classic. It's classic.
Speaking of classics, John Somsky, why don't you take us through some home game results, and then we'll do our draw for the winners of our membership drive.
All right. Well, let's start with the Daily Series TOC. So Spot Conlon, Daniel Kennedy won his first Daily TOC of the year, the second lifetime ever. So he's
That's
one of the
second silver pin.
Right. And it's different years, so he gets a silver pin for both of them.
Okay.
And he is one of the few 2-time winners of the TOC. Then John Lancer got his first nightly victory for the year. Novice Monk Christopher Hirsch got his second nightly victory for the year. Gopher Boy TJM Taylor got his first nightly victory for the year. Roadstar 33 got his third nightly victory for the year.
Randy's on a
Cat
heater.
32 Jeff Catalano got his first nightly victory for the year.
New premium member.
Chip and Flip Wreck. There we go.
I still like that one.
O'Driscoll got his second nightly victory for the year. J-Box 71, John Bachhuber got their first mixed event for the year.
One of the OGs.
And then Pet Bet 33, got her second international event, putting
The
her at
classic.
41 all-time event.
Right. Yes.
And not to be outdone, I think this happened last week too. Keck Geek 65 got his second international victory for the year to bring him to 42 all lifetime victories. Now, and last but not least, Tom Binkley, Eric Jin won the
nice.
LPP event, so he can contact Jim at rec.poker for his free month at Learn Pro Poker.
That's awesome. A bunch of killers in the winners ranks there. I know Eric, I think Eric already has a Learn Pro Poker membership. So I'm not going to put Eric on the spot, but maybe we'll use that free month as a prize for one of the new Peel events that he's going to be putting on starting in April or something. Eric is such a great member of the RECing Crew here. And starting in April, every Thursday night, he's going to be doing his Play, Explain, and Learn feature where you play with a series of other RecPoker Premium members in a simulated deep stack cash game environment. And he is able to record everyone's play with their cards up. And you take turns explaining your actions and your decision-making process while at the table while it's your turn. No one can hear each other, but he can hear everyone. And when he puts this final video together, you can all watch the action, seeing everyone's cards and hearing what their decision-making process was along the time. It's a fantastic way to learn from others, but it's also a great way to learn about your own play. Are you making good reasons for your decisions? And is your little BS detector going off every once in a while, as mine does there for sure. Joe, you quite enjoy the Peel events, don't you?
I do. They're a great way to have to think through your decision-making process and have some I don't want to say consequence, but it's like you got to recognize that everybody's going to see whatever dumb things you decide to do. I don't know why I'm saying I do dumb things when I play poker, but maybe it's just, I feel the need to admit it in this, square of truth or something. But, it's harder to just kind of throw a big dumb bluff out there or just call down just to see what someone has, knowing that everybody is going to be able to look at your play and say, not the best. But it's a great way to actually force yourself to think about what you're doing every single time. So it's wonderful.
Now, Joe, that's actually, I don't want to, oh, go ahead, Rob, please.
It reminds me of Sky Masuhachi many, many years ago, listening to his podcast. He always talks about game tape.
Mm-hmm.
So as you're playing, you record what you're online. If you're playing online, you record your play and talk through everything that you do. It gives you, it doesn't allow you to do things just because, well, I think I'll bet here. Well, why are you betting here? What are you betting for? And by putting it out on Peel and everybody can see it eventually, it gives you even more incentive to really think through your plays and understand why you're doing what you're doing. It's a great learning tool.
And Joe, I want to just talk a little bit about April 20th, which is coming up. That's going to be the first meeting of Joe Cool, PhD's Poker PsyOps. We don't have to get into any specifics about exactly what that's going to be like. And I think we'll talk to you on a forums edition coming up with some more details. But you just share a little bit about sort of what your plans are for this monthly group and what you're hoping to approach in the world of poker.
Well, I think it's going to be a variety of different things. I mean, there'll be videos that I try to put together ahead of time so I can be very precise in terms of different concepts. And sometimes it'll be question and answer. Sometimes it may be just opportunities for people to discuss problems or spots that they had at live tables or online. But again, the focus is, it's called PsyOps for a reason, Poker PsyOps, because I want to try to bring the entirety, as best I can, of psychological research into human behavior to try to take little segments and apply it to how you're playing. Again, a lot of times when you look at what's out there for the impact of psychology on poker play, it's always about mindset. And that's very important. I'm not trying to minimize that. But once that's going to be something you're going to work on for your entire life, and it's going to be difficult, and everybody has to improve on that. But you can't talk about that every single session because you're going to be saying the same things over and over. And that's actually the problem, is you get a lot of repetition when it's the psychology of poker, it's mindset. Well, all of the things related to behavioral economic theory is really psychology in terms of cognitive biases. It's biases that people use, and those biases impact why you play certain cards, why we become attached to aces, even when the board runs out terribly. There are cognitive reasons that we think, well, this is the best hand pre-flop, but it's not the best hand post-flop, but why can't I let it go? Why do I feel like I need to call down all the way, even when I know I'm probably beat? So all of those different things, if you can better understand them, it doesn't mean you can escape from them, but at least you can use them more effectively. And having conversations with people so that they can, in addition to understanding the concept, but also then pushing back at me so that I can try to use some of the skills that I have as a psychologist to say, okay, I understand why it is that you're saying that, but let's look at some examples of what you're likely to do in certain situations. You'll start to be able to see it in yourself in terms of when those things are driving you to do something that you really didn't intend. And that maybe when you look back at your hands afterwards, you're like, why did I do that? So that's what I hope to do with the sessions that we have. So be once a month, maybe videos in between that people can watch ahead of time, sometimes watching at the time, or maybe it'll just be a discussion, but that's what I'm looking to do.
Nice. Well, welcome to the team, man. You've made an impact already. I can't wait to get more involved with this monthly group. It's just another spoke in the wheel here at RecPoker, right? We all have our areas of expertise, or at least for some of us, we at least feel expert enough to talk about certain things. In your case, you've got a whack load of credentials that we don't have to worry about. For some of us are just kind of like making up as we go along. Don't tell anybody. But that's going to be fantastic.
I did want to point out to given the description of my poker prowess in the last podcast that I've developed a fan club. The Little Sisters of Lost Causes have been lighting lights for me, but unfortunately I did not win another home game this week. But I'm gonna keep trying.
There you go. Keep it up. That's right. Keep that chin up, Joe. I love it. All right. Well. Without Chris here, we're gonna have to revert to the black and yellow magical die. In order of entry, I see Mary McCune, Kim Kilroy, Stuart Carriage, Danny Wood, and Arnold Barron. That's 5. So if I roll a 1, let's make it a re-roll, just because. Yeah, I mean, well, what are the odds? It's been so long. I think the odds of it being a 1 are probably like 1 in 6 at best. Let's see. It was a 1. I kind of set us up for that one. But what are the odds of it being a 1 twice in a row? I mean,
at this point, 1 in 6.
It was a 5. Yeah, good point. Thank you, John. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is Danny Wood? Oh my God, Danny Wood.
No, because 1 was a reroll.
Yes.
So
then
2 would be, I think, Arnold Barron. Oh no, never mind. You're right. No, I got him out of order. You're right.
I'm glad. I want to know. We should always double check. We don't want any tomfoolery or bamboozling. I did start my countdown with 2 because of the. So I think.
Yep.
2,
Danny,
3, 4, 5.
Danny Wood is number 5.
Okay, there we go.
He said something after that, and I thought that was his food and bait. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
So, all my fault.
I appreciate this rigor. We need this kind of critical analysis, don't we, Joe?
Don't believe him. He's been trying to sell these things for for weeks, and people have been kind of sliding him like $2 in the hopes of getting.
Yeah, that's right. Right. All right. Well, Danny Wood is turning into a bit of a RecPoker personality here because they joined the podcast on YouTube a couple weeks ago, and I think they won a free month at RecPoker. And now, because they're a RecPoker premium member this month, they when they win tonight, they get to choose between all these other fantastic prizes available to us. So there you go. Danny's grinding it up. He's grinding it up the prize chain. I love that. Nice one. So Danny, send me that email, please, jim@rec.poker, and I'll get back to you with your choice of which training sites you want to be joining up with, or for a free month when the time is right for you. Arnold Barron, hopes and dreams dashed, just dashed to the rocks. It's a poor guy. John just picked him up and threw him into the blender there. Callous used up one of my yays. He says, yeah, that's right. Well, don't worry, Arnold. We're gonna for our regular listeners, you're gonna have many opportunities to win something fantastic here on the RecPoker podcast. All right, well, I want to just remind folks they can join us this Thursday for Rec Madness, and depending on what week you're listening to, this Thursday might be March 23rd with Rob Gardner, or it might be March 30th with Veronica Brill. And yeah, Rob said he would read Goodnight Moon if you want. Arnold, that's a good little that's a consolation prize for you. Although some would say that's the real prize. Yeah, episode 500 coming up. Let's think about what we could do that would be fun for episode 500. You never know. And I guess otherwise, I just want to thank the Running Aces Hotel. I want to thank Tom Bauer for, again, maybe our greatest interview ever, for all I know. Rob Washam, Joe Coolis, Troy Chapman, John Somsky, and our YouTube chatters, and you, the audience. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again next week.